Zenitsu versus every HASHIRA. When we're first introduced to Zenitsu Agatsuma, he is a crybaby who is most useful while asleep, so his road to becoming a seriously competent fighter in his own right has been fascinating to watch. But it is sometimes hard to measure his abilities relative to other members of the Demon Slayer Corps when we are not given a whole lot of context about the power scaling in this world. One point of reference that we do have though are the HASHIRA, a group of 9 elites who have reached the highest rank in the Corps. They are undeniably the strongest Demon Slayers, so if you want to get an idea of how much Zenitsu has really improved, matching him up against each HASHIRA and seeing how he'd fare is a pretty good way to do it. To give him a fighting chance, we're gonna assume that these hypothetical fights are happening after all that tasty character development, when he's at the peak of his abilities. Each HASHIRA presents unique challenges in a fight, and none of them would give Zenitsu an easy win, if he could win at all. I for one cannot wait to see what will happen when we pit Zenitsu at his strongest against the strongest. And for the strongest serotonin boost I can think of, be sure to subscribe to Plot Armor with notifications on to never miss an upload and join the 500,000 of us there are now. And smash that like button for some Plot Armor today. Zenitsu versus Gyyu Tomioka. Water HASHIRA Gyyu Tomioka is the first HASHIRA we ever met, and he remains one of the most powerful to the end of the series. After all, he is an opponent so formidable, the upper rank 3 demon, Akaza, offered to turn him into a demon to better capitalize on his remarkable skills. So he's probably one of the HASHIRA that Zenitsu would be least likely to best in a one-on-one skirmish. Now I get it, it is a bit of a downer to start with a likely loss, but there's good reason for that. For one, if you're looking for an example of why fighting HASHIRA would be a challenge for Zenitsu even at his very best, Gyyu is a great place to start. Most of his opponents comment on his incredible speed, and the fact that he is only one of 2 HASHIRA to survive the pivotal final battle with Muzan Kimetsu at the series conclusion, despite battling the same demons as his fallen comrades, speaks to his endurance, skill, and resilience. Gyyu is a great example of why the HASHIRA are so respected. He is an incredibly skilled fighter who goes toe-to-toe with the worst of the worst and lives to tell the tale. Given that intimidating introduction, it is easy to see why Zenitsu, even though he's immensely skilled at the end of the series, might struggle against Gyyu. Though Zenitsu is incredibly fast and possesses great endurance, Gyu's skills are likely more refined than his due to greater experience, and he has one thing that Zenitsu definitely does not: total mastery of his breathing style. There are 6 forms of thunder breathing, of which Zenitsu has only managed to master 1. He is compensated for that with additional variations of the first form, and true, he did invent a 7th form, Flaming Thunder God, in his climactic final battle against Kaigaku, a feat few others have achieved, but that is still not a great repertoire compared to the 11 forms of water breathing that Gyyu can use effortlessly. In the end then, this fight would probably be less about brute strength and about technical mastery, an area in which Gyyu excels. Since I don't see massive differences in their strength, endurance, or speed, I think the biggest gap between them skill-wise is in their mastery of breathing styles, and wow does it show. There is a reason that even Akaza acknowledges how skilled Gyyu is with a sword. Zenitsu has not mastered all the forms of his breathing style, and while that hasn't held him back all that much, the lack of options he has in terms of potential attacks might limit him in a fight against someone of Gyu's level. So throw Gyyu and Zenitsu in the ring together and I think the winner would be obvious. Final conclusion, Gyyu wins. Zenitsu versus Gyomei Himejima. From arguably the second strongest HASHIRA to the first, this matchup pairs Zenitsu with stone HASHIRA Gyomei Himejima. Said to be the strongest of his comrades, Gyomei seemingly is not hindered by the fact that he is blind, nor does his impressive size, he stands at 7'2" by the way, keep him from being fast and agile in combat. And when the upper rank 1 demon calls you a generational talent, well, that's when you know you've made it. Zenitsu is well past the point of breaking down into tears when he is about to face an intimidating opponent, but I have a feeling he'd be more than a little nervous if he had to face off against a hulking giant of an adversary like Gyomei. In a fight like this, Zenitsu's only hope would be to leverage his greater agility against his opponent. Gyomei's advantages in strength, size, and endurance are overwhelming, and I don't think any amount of training is ever going to bring him up to that level, but he has one leg up, and that is his size. Zenitsu is nearly 2 feet shorter than Gyomei and so much less bulky that I don't have a hard time believing he could possibly outmaneuver even a tour de force like the stone HASHIRA. Gyomei is enormously gifted both physically and technically, having mastered the use of a heavy spiked flail and an axe instead of a sword. But someone who's got that much body mass to move around is almost certainly not going to be able to match the smaller, younger, and less encumbered Zenitsu in agility. That said, pretty much the only strategy I can see having even a chance of working for Zenitsu would be to try and sneak into a blind spot and land a hit before Gyomei has a chance to react. Note that when I say blind spot, I am talking about somewhere where it is harder for Gyomei to sense his presence, as yes, I do remember I just told you guys that he is blind. But yeah, given the caliber of foes who have been unable to beat Gyomei before, as he was instrumental in defeating both Kimetsuji Muzan and Kokushibo, I can't say that it's very likely Zenitsu would pull that off though. As much as I hate to hand him 2 tough losses in a row, I really don't see this matchup working out in Zenitsu's favor. There are a handful of all-arounder HASHIRA who seemingly have every possible advantage in combat, and while that obviously isn't true seeing as the vast majority of them die, those make for tough opponents, and Gyomei is definitely one of them. Fight conclusion, Zenitsu probably gets pummeled. Zenitsu versus Mitsuri Kanroji. The bubbly love HASHIRA might pack more of a punch than she seems to, but how would she fare against Zenitsu? I'm not quite sure just yet, but this is definitely one of the most interesting matchups because Mitsuri's fighting style is unlike anyone else's. Boasting muscle density 8 times greater than that of the average person, extraordinarily flexible range of motion, and incredibly quick attacks, Mitsuri's lethality in combat starkly contrasts her bubbly personality. I mean, this is a woman who ripped Muzan's arm off with her bare hands. Clearly, her strength is nothing to joke about. So how would Zenitsu counter that unique set of capabilities? Mitsuri's breathing style, which she created herself to make use of the flexibility of both her body and her sword, is especially good for long-range attacks, so one tactic might be to try and engage Mitsuri in close combat to prevent her from using one of her large-scale forms. But that might spell danger too, since Mitsuri's physical strength is likely greater than Zenitsu's. He might quickly find himself in some trouble no matter what way he goes about it. Zenitsu and most of the HASHIRA are physically strong and have great endurance, skill, and speed, but Mitsuri's range of motion is unique among the HASHIRA, and she combines those more common strengths with one that is entirely her own. One of the easiest ways to win a fight is to present your opponent with an attack that they wouldn't have any idea how to counter, and that would be where Mitsuri excels. And let's face it, as graceful as her dancer-like movements can be in battle, Mitsuri totally strikes me as the type of person to go full MMA on Zenitsu if she gets a chance. I fully believe she'd pull it off if she tried. Though I feel like she's been given less scenes to demonstrate her combat skills, the sheer novelty of her breathing style and preferred tactics, not to mention her excellent performance in the final fight against Muzan, make me think she might be able to pull off a win. We know she's strong, but she feels harder to pin down than some of her comrades. And that's why I'm gonna go ahead and call the fight in her favor. Fight conclusion, Mitsuri wins. Zenitsu versus Muichiro Tokito. Now for a complete change of pace, you couldn't find 2 fighters more different than Mitsuri and Zenitsu's next opponent, the Mr. HASHIRA Muichiro Tokito. A 14-year-old prodigy with unbelievable endurance, superb swordsmanship skills, and strength that belie his age and size, Muichiro would no doubt prove to be a tough adversary for someone like Zenitsu. On paper, a lot of Zenitsu and Muichiro's strengths seem similar. They both possess unusual physical strength, and both have shown that they are able to continue fighting even while poisoned. But I think that Muichiro has an edge in this fight. It's not the fact that he was able to take down an upper rank demon all by himself that makes me inclined to give him the nod. Zenitsu did the same, though it bears mention that upper rank 5 Kaigaku hadn't attained his full potential yet when Zenitsu beat him. This is actually on account of Muichiro's frankly insane swordsmanship skills. While Zenitsu's sword skills are absolutely nothing to sneeze at, Muichiro is on another level. As anyone who's ever played a musical instrument knows, sometimes there is really no competing with a child prodigy. I mean, this is the guy who attained HASHIRA status in only 2 months. The only other HASHIRA to have gotten so far so fast was Gyomei Himejima, who is widely acknowledged as the strongest of the group. That ought to tell you something. That kind of prodigious talent speaks to power that could have been almost unbeatable if he had lived long enough to gain more experience. There's the matter of breathing styles too. Muichiro is a proficient user of misbreathing, a style that relies heavily on misdirection. It is meant to distract and disorient the opponent, making Muichiro's movements harder to follow and predict. That's going to be pretty tough on someone like Zenitsu, whose heightened senses are a big part of his ability to hold his own in a fight. Plus, Zenitsu only knows how to use the first form of thunder breathing, thunder clap, and flash. The first form and Zenitsu's many inventive variations on it all require him to strike his opponent before they even know it hit them, something Muichiro's misbreathing would make very difficult. And there's more to it. Sure, Zenitsu's speed, strength, and swordsmanship are up there with the best of the best, but the fact that it took him years of grueling training to reach a level comparable to what Muichiro attained in only a couple of months speaks to the massive gulf in innate talent between them. But don't get me wrong, talent is not everything, and the fact that they have both single-handedly defeated upper-ranked demons gives us a pretty good basis for the conjecture that their skill levels nowadays are probably well matched. But the kind of fortitude and skill that it takes to turn the blade of a Nichiren sword red while cut in half is pretty close to unparalleled, and I think that as befits someone of his unusual background, Muichiro is a cut above. Ultimately, I think that Muichiro's potential ceiling had he lived would have been much higher than Zenitsu's, and it's for that reason that I'm going to hand him the win in a one-on-one with our favorite thunder-breathing user. By conclusion, I think this one goes to Muichiro. Zenitsu versus Obanai Iguro. Next up, how would Zenitsu fare against the snake HASHIRA Obanai Iguro? Well, I think it's easy to say right off the bat that whatever the outcome, A fight with Obanai would stretch Zenitsu in ways that some of the other matchups just wouldn't. Quite simply, Obanai is not like any of the other HASHIRA. However, I can think of a couple of ways that Zenitsu might try to get the edge in this fight. The first of those would be to target Obanai's pet snake Kaburamaru. Because Obanai is blind in one eye, he uses Kaburamaru as a sort of second set of eyes, and his snake has a powerful ability of its own. He is able to predict what an opponent will do next, information that Obanai can use when his senses are dulled. Take out the snake and you put Obanai at a huge disadvantage against a tough opponent, so if Zenitsu wants to win, he would likely try to do just that. However, Zenitsu's best strategy for besting his opponent would not be an easy one to pull off, because I really cannot see a scenario in which Obanai is going to be eager to give up his snake. And since they're pretty much evenly matched in terms of their immense stamina and physical strength, the outcome of the fight would probably be determined by breathing styles and swordsmanship if Zenitsu's plan A did not pan out. Obanai's breathing style, which he created himself, is probably one of the most unique because it allows him to do things with his sword that defy all logic. Making use of the serpentine roots of his breathing style, Obanai is able to bend and curve his sword in ways that seem like they should be impossible. An opponent like Zenitsu, used to fighting opponents with plain old katanas that can't bend or deform, would probably have a hard time anticipating attacks coming from a swordsman whose weapon itself was able to bend to his will. Zenitsu's lightning fast thunderclap and flash would no doubt cause problems for Obanai too, but I personally think it is a little more conventional than any of these snake breathing forms. Thus, it would be closer in style to techniques Obanai had already fought against. Zenitsu, who hasn't had the luxury of experiencing a fight against anything remotely like snake breathing before, would probably lose a bit of ground there, and Kaburamaru's predictive powers would make it hard for him to stay ahead. With all that being said, I'm going to hand this victory to Obanai, who always manages to throw down when it counts. By conclusion, Obanai wins. Zenitsu versus Kyojuro Rengoku. Ah, Rengoku, the flame HASHIRA and fan favorite. It sure is a shame to make them fight each other, and it's even more of a shame because Rengoku is not the kind of guy you want to pick a fight with. He might have the disposition of a Labrador Retriever, but if he is resolved to win, it is going to be pretty hard to come out of the skirmish as well off as you went in. I'm not sure if even a talented trainee like Zenitsu would be able to pull it off. For one thing, Rengoku is impressively fast, once almost derailing a train with the shockwave that his speed produced as he ran. Zenitsu's thunder breathing relies heavily on his speed, so facing an opponent who is even faster than he is, he might find himself unable to land many hits. And he won't be able to rely on waiting for Rengoku to slow down either, because his stamina and pain tolerance are beyond human limits. However, we have to remember that for all those great things, Akaza still managed to off him with relatively little effort, while Zenitsu managed to kill Upper Moon 5 all by himself. Now, the argument could easily be made that Kaigaku and Akaza were worlds apart in terms of power, but it is important to note that distinction. This list tends to look more at fighting styles and how they could play off of each other, rather than opponents that each combatant has defeated or not defeated in the past, but in this case, I think it is worth looking into. Because as strong as Rengoku's considerable abilities make him look on his own, it is also noteworthy that Rengoku was not able to do what Zenitsu, a much younger and less experienced trainee, did: defeat an Upper Moon single-handedly. A feat no lone demon slayer had accomplished in over 100 years, which technically no HASHIRA actually managed to do over the course of the entire series. To his credit, a younger Rengoku did defeat Lower 2 by himself, but that comparison makes it plausible to float the idea that the Zenitsu we see by the end of the series might have a leg up with this fight. Then again, there is an inherent degree of bias in the fact that when we last see Zenitsu and Rengoku interact, the gulf between the two is wildly different than it is by the end of the series. The Zenitsu we see in the Mugen Train arc is very much a work in progress and does not even come close to the power of HASHIRA, so naturally, he seems weaker. But think about it, how much of Zenitsu's development has occurred since Rengoku's death? His growth in confidence, skill, and tactical intelligence between the Mugen Train arc and the final chapters of the series is staggering. Might he actually be close to or even above Rengoku's skill level at his peak? I think it's possible. It's hard to know, the other HASHIRA certainly seem to look up to Rengoku, and even Akaza calls him unbelievable. But comparing the outcomes of their respective battles with the upper rank demons, a metric by which Zenitsu comes out looking a lot better, makes me think that Zenitsu truly has surpassed Rengoku by the end of the series. By conclusion, Zenitsu takes the win. Zenitsu versus Sanemi Shinazugawa. I'm gonna go out on a limb and guess that the Wind HASHIRA is not the one anyone would choose to go head to head with if given the option. Sanemi is not only abrasive and intimidating, but incredibly powerful, and just generally the kind of guy you probably wouldn't want to cross. Even at his very best, I don't think that Zenitsu would either. He is widely acknowledged as one of the strongest and most skilled HASHIRA. Even Kokushibo comments on that, and has been able to keep up with every single demon he's come across, at least to some extent. There are a few HASHIRA, as I mentioned when we talked about Gyomei, who seem to be a cut above, and I think that Sanemi is one of them. Zenitsu would no doubt do his best to leverage his considerable skill against Sanemi, but if Kokushibo wasn't even able to defeat Sanemi, could Zenitsu? I doubt it. As fast and skilled with a sword as Giyu, able to control his muscles to prevent wounds from keeping him out of the fight, and resourceful enough to realize that lighting a demon on fire with oil would be just as effective as any breathing form, Sanemi has a lot going for him in a battle. As satisfying as it might be to see Zenitsu take down someone who seems to be in a league of his own, there's a reason that would be an underdog win. It would take an exploitative weakness for Zenitsu to get the better of Sanemi, and unless you count his younger brother Genya, he doesn't seem to have many of those. By conclusion, Sanemi takes a relatively easy win. Zenitsu versus Shinobu Kocho. This will be an interesting one since it matches Zenitsu up with someone whose greatest strength in combat is similar to his. Though Zenitsu's fighting style is very diverse, one of its greatest assets is his speed. And when it comes to speed, the gold standard is undoubtedly the insect HASHIRA, Shinobu Kocho. Most demon slayers have a single objective in battle, behead whatever demon comes their way. But because her small stature and lack of brute strength make that nearly impossible for Shinobu to accomplish, she uses a dagger coated in demon killing poison as a weapon instead of the traditional Nichiren sword, and developed a combat style reliant on her speed, agility, and ingenuity to defeat opponents. This definitely makes her one of the most interesting matches for Zenitsu, whose methods have never been conventional either. After all, many of his tactics developed out of a problem he had early on. He was too afraid to jump into battle, unless he was asleep. So Shinobu and Zenitsu, despite their very different combat styles, have several very big things in common, and I think that would make this a pretty even matchup. They are both incredibly fast, able to move at a rate that even the eye cannot detect, and they both sharpened their skills because they had a major weakness to overcome. Thinking about it, fighting asleep all the time definitely sharpens Zenitsu's superhuman hearing and awareness of his surroundings once he felt confident enough to wake up. So they are both deeply aware of their weaknesses and how to overcome them. Zenitsu would know how vital it is to not let Shinobu land a hit, and Shinobu would be very weary of how exactly Zenitsu's strength would overpower her own if it came to that. However, that's all easier said than done. Shinobu's fighting style is based on piercing and stabbing movements that are designed to deliver poison to the target, weakening them and allowing her to land the killing blow. If that fails, there's not much left she can do against a human opponent, so naturally, she would be extremely focused on landing her hits. To do that, she would have to be moving fast enough to keep him from dodging. Any strategy that Zenitsu devised would have to allow for him to dodge Shinobu's attacks until he was able to overpower her, which he'd probably have to do in some sort of ambush attack. So we're at an interesting impasse. Two crazy fast combatants whose respective strengths give them a near guaranteed victory if they manage to get the upper hand. Zenitsu's biggest advantage here is that he has the pure muscle that Shinobu lacks. If brought to a standstill, Shinobu could easily be overpowered by a stronger fighter, and physical strength has never been one of Zenitsu's weaknesses. Both of them would probably be relying heavily on their speed in this fight, because both have surefire ways of defeating the other if they can land a blow. That spices things up. Get both opponents moving at supersonic speed and you end up with a fight whose outcome is wildly up in the air. But ultimately, because they are both skilled tacticians who would likely arrive at the same conclusion about the best strategy, I think this would be more of a marathon than a sprint, a battle of endurance, not skill. If we get right to the heart of it, victory here really boils down to who can dodge for longer. You could make the argument either way, but I think that makes Zenitsu the likelier winner of this face-off. After all, Shinobu is someone who almost always finishes her fights quickly, while Zenitsu has had several fights that have lasted a taxing amount of time. In the Entertainment District arc, he had to maintain fighting form for long enough to counter 6 chapters worth of brutal attacks from upper rank 6 Daki, many of them while seriously injured. That is stamina for you. And that's just one of the many fights in which Zenitsu has held his own for a long time. Shinobu definitely has a lot of resilience. Doma, a demon powerful enough to have reached the rank of Upper Moon 2, is shocked at her ability to keep fighting while gravely injured. But her stamina isn't as great over a long period of time. Because she is so reliant upon her speed, I would imagine that her attacks take a lot more energy than Zenitsu's would, and they would probably wear her down a lot quicker. And the more tired she is, the easier it would be for Zenitsu to find an opening that would let him overpower her. This is definitely not an easy fight to call, and I honestly feel like I might have been underestimating Shinobu's tremendous agility and intelligence in calling the fight for Zenitsu. But I think that she might run into the same problem that she had with Doma. Fighting a physically stronger opponent of her skill level might just prove to be too much for her. By conclusion, I would hand this one to Zenitsu. Zenitsu versus Tengen Uzui. There is nothing flashier than getting your butt kicked by your former mentor, right? That's probably what Sound HASHIRA Tengen Uzui would have to say about this matchup. And honestly, he might not be totally wrong there. Flashy or not, Tengen is likely one of the hardest HASHIRA to take on in a one-on-one fight. Considered to be one of the strongest HASHIRA, second only to Gyomei in pure physical strength, Tengen's overwhelming advantage in size and strength would prove to be a tough obstacle for Zenitsu to overcome, and that isn't his only leg up. Tengen also shares Zenitsu's heightened sense of hearing, and his former training as a shinobi gave him a skill set that the other HASHIRA simply do not possess. For one, he's proficient in the use of weapons that the others do not use, and his training lent him stealth too. Opponents can barely hear him coming. You would think that he would have some huge shortcomings to make up for all those lofty advantages. Maybe you'd figure a guy that tall and beefy isn't too fast. Wrong. He is the fastest runner of the HASHIRA too, and when he and Zenitsu worked together in the Entertainment District arc, his speed was too much for even the lightning fast Zenitsu to keep up with. You might be asking at this point what advantage Tengen doesn't have over Zenitsu, and that's honestly a difficult question to answer. He even created his own breathing style like Obanai did that uniquely uses his hearing and proficiency with weapons to give him a leg up against opponents. Honestly, I can't see any strategy Zenitsu could employ that would actually let him win this fight. He could try to take advantage of the speed of his breathing style to catch Tengen unaware, but someone of such heightened senses and keen awareness as well as immense speed would probably still be able to dodge. Injury doesn't slow him down nearly as much as you would expect. He very nearly takes down an upper rank demon with a missing hand while poisoned. His musical score ability allows him to predict opponents' attacks, and honestly, his biggest weakness is that it takes a long time to use, and seriously, his so-called weakness is an ability useful enough to give almost anyone a huge edge in combat. That doesn't seem very fair. Zenitsu is a more than capable fighter by the end of the series, and I don't want to discount the kind of guy who takes down an upper rank demon by himself, but I just don't think that Zenitsu would be able to come out as the victor in this matchup. By conclusion, Tengen takes it. Now, it's not as if any of these fights would have played out in canon, but it's fun to think about how they might have gone down if Zenitsu had faced off against the strongest of his allies. But what do you think? Did we nail it, or are any of these summations way out of left field? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. As always, I'm Slice of Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.